Hello.
Hey, how are we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Good to see you, Cynthia. You
Good to
know,
see you too, Richard. We are live, and this is our debut show of the 13%.
so yeah, this is our first one. You guys got to bear with us a little bit. We're getting our rhythm.
Right.
We have a lot of things that to talk about. There's a lot of things going on. Obviously, Cynthia and I we discuss issues regarding modern news events, current affairs, or whatever is actually something that is affecting the Black community, affecting the greater community, but also in regard to how African Americans are looking at things from our perspective of being part of the 13%.
Right. So I guess that we should introduce ourselves and say who we really are. So, uh, Richard, introduce yourself. Tell people who you really are.
Well, my name is Richard Graves. I'm the director of a not-for-profit public policy group called the Richard Graves Group. I am by academic discipline a political scientist, a historian, and a Bible scholar and theologian. I have a master's degree in religion and biblical studies. I have a master's degree in American history, and I'm a PhD candidate in public policy. So when I talk about these things, I try to talk to them from historical context and a political context in regard to American political society and life.
That's great. In other words, you are a really smart Negro.
I get that t-shirt made next.
Hi, I'm Cynthia, and I'm not the straight man in this group. I'm just kidding. I am I guess, well, we can start with educational background. I have a bachelor's in organizational leadership management, and I also have a certification in community health. I am currently a social worker in the city of Chicago. And I am also part of the political advocacy group called ADOS Chicago, and definitely must part of the greater ADOS community. ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And I am recently activated mostly in the political atmosphere because and then we're definitely going to be talking about this more as time goes on. We, as Black Americans, especially Black Americans that descend from chattel slavery, are quite underrepresented. Underrepresented. Oh my God, I cannot talk. See, this is what happened when you run like about 4 miles before you actually come and do this. So I will never do that again. Anyway, we, as Black Americans that are especially that descend from chattel slavery are underrepresented in the political atmosphere. And we can definitely see that when it comes to policies or lack of policies dealing with our group. So, we at ADOS Chicago and the greater ADOS community and different chapters across the United States are really activated to actually change that so that we can have a better position here in America and actually have access to full citizenship.
Amen. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
well, being full disclosure, me and Cynthia have slight differences in our political view. I would be probably more considered right of center. I am
Mhm.
a member of the Republican Party of Illinois and the National Republican Party. I do not believe in voting party line. I believe in voting for politicians that will serve the community. I worked for Governor Pritzker's campaign because I thought Ronner was bad for Illinois, and I actively vote against Trump anytime I can because he's bad for the country and the world. But that's a different discussion.
And we will have that discussion. Yeah, I would definitely consider myself more left center. I do believe in a capitalistic society with a very strong social component. That's kind of how I roll. And I don't consider myself really affiliated with a party. full disclosure, have voted heavily Democratic in the past. However, my mindset has definitely shifted in recent years, as far as how voting should be done, especially when you're a Black American. More so, instead of voting blue, no matter who, it's about voting for our interest. And I'm definitely more concerned about voting for interests in Black America and who is going to basically take our agenda and run with it. At this point, I'm more about, do you adhere to our agenda? Then yes, then we will push you and support you. If you don't adhere to our agenda, then next.
I agree. We agree there.
Yes, we do.
Well, speaking about our agenda, I know we talked a little bit earlier about the situation with the shooting down in Georgia, Mr. Arbery, and all the different types of the range of responses that we're seeing from people, both Black and white, left and right, everything in between. And I know you and I both were I was sent a link to Candace Owens and her always interesting opinions about things. And I had to say that it's interesting, how she operates. She has no shame.
Right.
She, in my opinion, and I'm going to be honest in my opinion of her, she's intellectually fraudulent. She tries to present herself as being an intellectual, and she says things that are blatantly not true.
Right.
She willfully mischaracterizes the situation. She creates straw men in every discussion she has instead of actually dealing with the actual issue. And I also accuse her of being academically lazy because she's made some statements that are clearly just so silly as basically saying water doesn't make things wet.
Right.
I don't know if you saw her in front of the, I think it was the Senate Judiciary or maybe the House of Representatives, on there saying that racism isn't a thing and Southern strategy never happened. And, so she falls into that false narrative. Let me give you a little backdrop on Black Republicans. Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. You got your Colin Powells and Condoleezza Rice's. They're more what we call neoconservatives. Okay. They're Reagan conservatives. Most of what they believe is based on fiscal policy that is pro-business, that is pro-multinational corporation, that is at that time, obviously, when they got into the party, there was still a Cold War, so still very pro-military and things like that. Then you have what I call the Christian or moral African-American Republicans who become Republicans because of an issue that is tied to religious faith, be it anti-abortion. That's a big one. Sometimes it's the opposition of rights for homosexuals and transgender people. If they come from those type of churches that push that agenda, they can also get caught up in the being part of the grand old party by that aspect, aligning themselves with evangelical Christians. Then you have those like myself who become Republicans simply because in this two-party system, you got to pick one. And it's not that we don't see the Republican Party as being racist. We just see that the Democratic Party is as racist in a different way, because the Democratic and Republican parties are part of the systems and institutions of America. And as you and I have discussed, there are, the racism we're dealing with is systemic and institutional. That applies to all systems and all institutions. That would apply to the system of politics and the institutions of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Both racist, or actually, I won't even say racist, both having white supremacist elements that are anti-Black that manifest themselves very differently. So depending on where you live, it might be better to be a Republican, better to be a Democrat, depending on your locality. But again, Republicans like myself, Black Republicans, we vote for who's going to be best for the community. And we don't care if you got a blue or red dot by your name. We're voting for who's best for the community. And then you have this, what I call the neo-Black conservative movement. This is your Candace Owens. This is your Sheriff Clark. This is Ben Carson. Right. These are the type of Blacks that Allen West fits that category too to some degree. These are a
Mm,
type of blacks that they market themselves by talking to white people about black people. So
mm,
and they use some of the old standbys, like they use the city of Chicago as an example, saying, "Well, why are blacks always Democrats? Look at what happened in Chicago. Worse
right.
schools, more crime." And of course, remember what I said: it's intellectually fraudulent position to take because Chicago does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in the state of Illinois within the United States of America. And
Right.
Chicago didn't exist in a vacuum during the Nixon administration, which was bad for black people with its war against crime. It was the Reagan administration, which had elements that were bad for black people with its war on
War on
drugs
drugs.
and
Yeah.
how disproportionately affected inner city, predominantly black communities.
Right.
So so for people like that, um, they make these arguments, but they don't ever contextualize. And you'll never hear them
Hmm.
criticize the Republican Party. They'll criticize the Democratic Party all day long. But, a Republican can be burning a cross and they'll make an excuse for it.
Hmm.
Candace Owens is so absurd that if she came across a Republican convention where they were burning crosses and Confederate flags, she would somehow justify it. That's how off the rails she is,
Hmm.
and I listened to her video,
Hmm.
and I'll just talk a little bit about it and leave it alone.
Hmm.
The initial 3 minutes, I was just disgusted at what she was doing.
Mm.
The rhetorical game she was playing. Number one, what she did was move the goalpost. Right?
Mm.
She didn't talk about a man's dead. She goes straight into, oh, the media is making this about race. They all stand by the media.
Yeah.
The fake
That's
news.
her. That's her regular thing. That's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
she loves to do that all the time. Yeah.
Right. So she attacks the media. All
Hmm.
right, which is fine, but she doesn't attack the media for not reporting the story for 6 weeks or 2 months, however long it was, before we even heard about this happening.
Of course
Just
not.
right. So what I got from her immediately was she is so far gone in her, pardon my language, bullshit
Mm.
that when she's so far gone in her bullshit, she might even believe her bullshit. I'm sure she's getting paid
Hmm.
for her bullshit. All right,
Hmm.
but she's so far gone that she misses the whole point of a human being being killed. And remember what I said
Hmm.
about white people, the problem that white people have systemically in America, culturally in America, is seeing us as human.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, white supremacy worked on us as well. All
Yeah.
right. It worked on us where we don't even see ourselves as human sometimes. We don't see each other as human sometimes.
Mm. That's
And
the
she
point of white
Yes,
supremacy.
right. And
Yeah.
she falls in that category. She's
Yeah.
not looking at Mr. Aubrey as a human being that died. And then she qualifies it with, well, he was in a construction site and he was running in khakis. The bottom line is, I don't care if he was running butt naked. All right. All right. And screaming down the street. There was
Right.
no moral authority to shoot this man. And
Right.
then she qualified, well, he attacked them. Of course he did. They got a shotgun. They're chasing you down the car. Right.
Hmm.
Unless he was committing, and the bottom line, the law is very simple. He wasn't committing a forcible felony. All right.
Hmm.
Follow him. Tell the police where he's at if you're really a concerned citizen,
Hmm.
and then deal with it. And then she completely dismisses the idea of race having anything to do with it, because
Hmm.
these white people weren't burning crosses and they weren't doing lynching. And she really minimized the idea of lynchings. She goes to historical. Well, there was only 30. A black person saying there were only 3,500 lynchings between 1865 and 1935, whatever number she used.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so, and that makes it what? I mean, was
Yeah.
it's like, was anybody other group being lynched at that degree? And it's just the fact that it was the system and culture and society behind the lynchings. These people were having picnics. I don't care if it
Right.
was one. If you have a lynching and people are having picnics, watching a black man hang while his genitals are cut off for entertainment,
Yes.
that
Yes.
so she dismisses that and therefore
Hmm.
dismisses the reality of white supremacy in America as a system, and
Right.
then makes it worse. She keeps on trying to qualify it and minimize it, and then she goes with the old standby that, well, the Democrats use race to manipulate black people. I absolutely agree with that. The Democrats do use race to manipulate black people, but
Hmm.
the Republicans use race to manipulate white people. All right, so
Mm.
let's just, I mean, if you're going to criticize something, be objective, be real with it. I mean, I
Right.
don't believe in throwing rocks from glass houses. If you're going to,
Hmm.
hey, I'm going to criticize my party first for what I see is wrong. Now, when I see the
Hmm.
Democrats doing something blatant, I'll mention it. But
Right.
she attacks all the rhetorical tools that people that have used to describe it. Like she attacked LeBron James for saying it was a modern day
Yeah.
lynching. And
Yeah.
don't get me
And
wrong, I've cautioned my African Americans after the initial onslaught of all these things in this modern era with Trayvon Martin or with Michael Brown or with
mhm,
Eric Garner. I cautioned, said we have to realize we're not talking to each other in barbershops anymore. We're
mhm,
not talking to each other over the card game, listening to the OJs. We're not having. That's not what we're doing. What we're
mhm,
doing is we're talking to the world. So the
mhm,
hyperbole and rhetoric we use, rhetorical, the language we use, we have to be deliberate about what we're saying because we're talking to the world. If we expect the
mhm,
world to understand, we got to talk in real terms, not emotional ones. Now, you and I, as
mhm.
Black people, we know what it means when we say it's a modern day lynching. We are
Sure.
not. We're not literally saying that he was lynched with a
Mhm.
rope and
Right.
epoxy. We're not
Right.
literally saying it. We're using hyperbole, which she should
Mhm,
understand because she uses a
mhm,
lot of rhetoric and hyperbole. But
mhm.
she disconnects herself from our community, and
Yeah.
therefore, so she doesn't. Oh, I don't know why this. Because again, they talk to white people about
Mhm,
Black people. I can
mhm,
respect their bullshit if they talk to us about it. If
mhm,
they came to our Black churches and our mosques and our synagogues or our community centers and spoke to us, I can respect you having that opinion. All
mhm,
right, but you're not speaking to us. You're speaking to white crowds. You're
mhm,
speaking to a white demographic to
mhm,
justify their bullshit is what you're
mhm,
doing.
mhm,
So that's the reality of the situation, and that's what I find disgusting about her.
mhm,
And the fact that she criticized LeBron. Well, LeBron lives in a big house. LeBron relates to this Black man, even though they were miles apart socioeconomically. He
mhm,
relates to a Black man. He sees himself.
mhm,
I'm probably in a very different position than Mr. Aubrey was in life, but
mhm,
I see myself in him. I see a
mhm,
Black man, a human being that
mhm,
was running. I don't
mhm,
care. Like I said, there was nothing he could have been unless he was running from a rape or a murder or
mhm,
running from a prison. There's,
mhm.
I mean, in law enforcement, you can only shoot people who are running when they have escaped the prison or when they
Mhm.
are running from a forcible felony. If they're committing a misdemeanor or theft, you can't. You're like, okay, whatever. I'll catch you later. We're gonna put that warrant on you. Nobody. I mean, but now, so to justify random white men just being able to drive up and shoot you because they want to play police, and
Mhm,
for a Black woman to do that, she should be disgusted with herself. And the fact that she
mhm.
isn't is fascinating. You know.
You you know, so I did watch the video where she was trying to, as I like to say, Negro explain what the whole facts were about this particular case. And there's so many different layers that we can talk about with Candace Owens. I mean, I don't necessarily like to point out that she is not. One of the things is that she's not. Uh, I'm not sure like her full lineage, but she did mention that I think that her family is from St. Thomas, if I'm not mistaken. Uh,
Caribbean Negroes.
yes, yes,
They
yeah. And I
can
mean, like,
sometimes be a little different.
yeah, it's a little different. I mean, and full disclaimer, people, like I am half, my mom is from the Caribbean, so I just want to keep that out there. So, just so I'm gonna speak on this real quick.
Mhm.
When it and I when it comes to like, immigrants, as far as when you're Black, you're coming from a country that is predominantly Black coming here. Your the way that you maneuver is going to be different from a Black person that actually descended from slavery here. And the reason being is because how ones were governed in a country that was predominantly Black coming here is way different than it is how we're governed here.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I was talking to a friend of mine earlier, and we constantly hear this thing. This is a little bit quicker than I want to go here, but you would hear a lot of why isn't that why are Black Americans have a hard time like embracing their Americanness per se, Like, we have a tendency to have gone through a lot of different nomenclatures. If we were colored, we were Negro, we were, and now we're like, since 1989, considered African American. And then like overall of that is race for Black, right? But one of the things that had happened with a lot of other countrymen from other predominantly Black countries is that they actually took on their nationality. So like if you have like a person that is from Haiti, they're considered themselves Haitian, Jamaican, Bahamian, from Bahamas, Bahamian, etc. And they were able to actually take in their particular nationality and kind of form a group of solidarity together in order for them to be able to move forward. One of the things that happened with Black Americans is that we didn't really get a chance to do that. And the main reason is because of Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws kept us from fully accessing citizenship. And going back to some of the things that you mentioned before, so when we're talking about lynching, and one of the things that she failed miserably to talk about when she mentioned lynching is that people were able to lynch and get away with it because the ones who were doing the lynching had protection from law enforcement in that area that they can
or were the law enforcement in that
or
area.
right, exactly. And yeah, I kind of want to go back to that whole thing about law enforcement and what we're seeing now, but we'll put a pin in that. But so either they were able to participate in the killing, the maiming, all those different things of Black bodies, get away with it because they had the protections under the law, because either they were the law enforcement or they were participating in some shape, way, or form of the law enforcement. I mean, we can talk about how how so many members of the KKK were police officers. A lot of them were police officers. A lot of them were elected officials. A lot of them held some type of government position. Okay, so so even with that, they would still have access to that protection, so that they were able to not only help with laws, to basically protect the white supremacist counterpart and be an adverse for Black Americans, but they were also able to make sure that, whatever happens basically to a Black body, fine. It's really okay. It really wasn't until we saw like a lot of outrage starting from, Emmett Till's death back in, what was it, I want to say 1954, 1955, something to that effect. When you really saw what, these white supremacists did just because allegedly he whistled at a white woman, and then, but the problem is that, these particular situations are continuously happening and happening and happening and happening and happening. And even though as much as we as Black Americans, especially that descend from chattel slavery, want to stop talking about race, want to put down race, want to not even think about race, we can't, because it's consistently in our faces about when race actually rears his head, we're the ones who actually are affected in the adverse. So even going back to, so I kind of want to, talk about some of the stuff that she mentioned in her video. I wrote stuff. I really did.
Okay.
I did. I was like, ooh, I'm going to mention this.
There was so much. It was packed with so much.
Yeah.
Pathological. Yeah, the woman, she has no shame.
No, she doesn't. I mean, like, oh my gosh, it was just so much stuff. Let me see if I can find, because I wrote notes because I have to do that. Okay, here we go. Okay, so, one of the things that she mentioned, let me see, what did she say here? Okay, so one of the first things that she talked about was the whole thing about the modern day lynching and basically how we completely ran with that particular narrative. And then only mentioning about 3,500 that were lynched per se, or even deemed lynched. Number one, I think that number is higher. It's just that, that's what we know that was reported. I
Let's
I,
con-
I think that per se. Oh, but
let's
what would
con-
you say?
let's contextualize that. All right,
Mhm.
the 3,500 lynchings were public events that are documented, right?
Right.
How many black people do you think in the South during Jim Crow? All right, I've heard stories about people killed because they went to go vote, shot dead.
Right.
I've heard stories of African Americans who were killed because their farm was doing better than the white person down the street.
Right.
So we're not counting all those things that happened, all that terrorism against the African American community, because at the end of the day, even with those 3,500 lynchings, the point was to terrorize everybody else that was black.
Right.
To get everybody back in line, stay in your place, nigga, is what that was
Hmm.
all about.
Right.
So let's
Exactly.
be real. That's what it was about. So
Hmm.
again, her arbitrarily dismissing that is just, like I said, it shows she's completely disconnected from her humanity, let alone her blackness. All right,
It
and
was
she's completely intellectually fraudulent.
right. It was. If we even want to put it in like the whole logical fallacy category, it was a red herring. It was a total red herring, and
Hmm.
and and the reason being is because she was trying to and I would say even I almost want to say false equivalence too, because what she was basically trying to do was separate what she is defining what lynching is concerning this particular situation with Ahmad. She was basically trying to connect these, was trying to say that these are separate type of situations as far as like lynching is concerned. As you mentioned before, lynchings were public events. These were times where you basically strung up black bodies and put them on display for entertainment purposes, and also to scare black folk into making sure that they kept their place and
Absolutely.
kept their place in those particular communities. So yeah, red herring all the way. Another thing that she was mentioning is that when you were talking about LeBron James, and basically she called him stupid.
Yeah, of course.
She said if he was laugh out loud stupid, only because he mentioned saying about literally being hunted, and
Hmm.
also this is a modern day lynching, and and also call him ridiculous, and one of the things that I don't know, Richard, if you noticed that I have not really been privy to a whole bunch of black celebrities actually speaking out, with knowledge when it comes to what's happening to us in the black community. And it's
Hmm.
not a lot. It's like it's a one-off here and there, or if they do say something, it's completely without the proper context or education that goes behind it.
Right.
You know, um, and so and I mean, like, shout out actually to LeBron James for actually speaking out to this, that that he is more than what is her name, Laura Ingalls, just
Mhm.
shut up and dribble. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Exactly.
because my whole thing is, it's like, if you're going to be in this particular space, and take it back to you a house head, you grew up on hip hop, so did I. And sometimes you would hear like some of the old hip hop guys, especially when they were doing gangster rap, saying that I'm not a role model.
Right.
But
Right.
but to be honest, like, anytime that you are actually thrusted into a limelight situation, you
Hmm.
immediately become a role model, whether you
Well,
want to or not. I mean, you do. I mean, because
yeah.
what's going to happen is that people who look like you, who are not in the position as you are, they're going to look up to you, and they're going to look up to what you do, what you say, how you dress,
Exactly.
all this stuff. I mean, it kind of comes with the territory. Now, if we should look at black celebrity as role models, I would say no. Obviously, because Candace Owens is a black celebrity, and she is definitely not somebody that I would ever say that any person should look up to.
Right.
But that's a whole different topic. But when you have these particular platforms, that's going to come with the territory. So my whole thing, even in that, was saying that is, if you're going to have these particular platforms, what good are you if you're not going to speak out to things that are happening to people who look like you? You know,
Absolutely.
we can't, like I mentioned previously, Black folk do not have the luxury to divorce ourselves from race.
No.
The reason why race is because of us. The reason why we have, we have black, we have white, and everything in between is because of us. Because of what happened back in 1681 after Bacon's Rebellion. That's when you saw the birth of race.
Right. It actually goes back a little further than that. It does go back to the end of the 16th century when the Portuguese began the transatlantic trade slaves.
Sure.
At that point is when the definitions of blackness and whiteness begin to formulate.
Right.
And for the purpose of facilitating that. And let me give a disclaimer real quick. A few moments ago, I used the N-word in the context of saying something that someone lynching a black person would say. So I'm going to tell you guys right now who's viewing, if that type of thing shakes you up, as Denzel said, then this ain't the show for you, because I'm going to be very clear and historically contextualize what I'm saying. I am a historian. If I'm going to say what somebody said from 1845, I'm going to say what they said. We're not going to get Mark Twain edited where we take out the N-word. You need to hear the reality of what people thought and get that emotion. And if it hurts your feelings, then that means that you should know how it makes us feel when someone's trying to kill us saying those same words. So that's what I'm going to say there. That being said, yeah, you're absolutely correct in regard to race. The idea of race was created to facilitate the slave trade, to dehumanize us, to make the excuse of why we were okay to make slaves. And that's what it comes down to, because they had to do a lot of justification. People weren't buying it. A lot of people weren't buying it. You have to understand, in the historical context, this is another reason why there's a big difference between our history as African Americans that's different from Caribbean blacks or Afro-Latino. It's very different because of how the slave trade was conducted by the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, and the Americans here in the United States at the time frames they happened. And
don't forget the English.
Yeah, and the English, that's the United States. But overall, the time frames that these happened and how broad it was here in the colonies created very different realities than what you would see down there. So in many cases, for example, in the Caribbean and South America and Central America, the blacks there were able to maintain some of their culture from Africa, some of their language from Africa. I think I said before, I always find it fascinating that African Americans we're very in touch with our blackness, but not so in touch with our Africanness. Whereas people from the Caribbean and Latin American countries, they're not so, well, recently they've become more in touch with it, but they're not as in touch with their blackness, but they're very in touch with their African ancestry. Even the lightest of Puerto Ricans know certain, songs like River Ocean that they sing, or they know certain words within the Santeria religion, or words in their language they utilize, or things they say. So we don't have that because ours was completely stripped. And there are, different social, political, and actually some religious reasons why that happened this way. The Catholic Church was a powerful force that was trying to reconcile the clear hypocrisy of saying you believe in a God that believes everybody has value and devaluing a group of human beings. So they had to keep philosophizing to find okay, look, we just got to make them citizens of the crown because they're humans. And so that's why in Brazil, for example, they have a very different idea about their blackness than we do. And, they feel they're Brazilian, they're a Portuguese ancestry. They embrace their Portuguese ancestry because they early on were citizens of the crown, whereas African-American slaves were never citizens of the United Kingdom. We weren't citizens. We were never considered citizens. We were never considered human. So we didn't embrace being colonists. We didn't embrace being Americans. We weren't allowed to be Americans till 1964, with all practical purposes. So we're not going to accept. So it is a very different thing. And obviously, people coming from those countries, they are all black countries. Also, when they come over, though, they're coming from abject poverty. So they're coming from.
Some of them are.
Yeah, well, a lot of them.
Yeah, no, some. Yeah,
but a lot of them do. Like the Haitians, a lot of the Jamaicans, a lot of the Africans come here. They come here for, they come on student visas, and they see the opportunities we have, and they believe that why are you so lazy? But that's how all immigrants who come from a situation where it's uneven socially, economically, even uneven. If people come from Asia, they see American Asians that are generationally Americans as, oh, you guys are lazy, because they're coming from a different worldview, a different culture, and so. And then they come into the game, like I said, when they start talking about race, I'm like, just shut up. I think you need to take a few history classes because you need to
Yeah.
understand what you got,
You know,
what you got into.
and to be honest, like anytime that I would hear those tropes, especially coming from like immigrants, especially when they're talking about Black Americans being lazy, it really pisses me off. First off, like, the previous to 1965, immigrants, especially Black immigrants, was at the right of the decimal point. My mother got here in 1963. My grandfather was here, I want to say like in the 50s. He came through a work program doing when he would come up to work on farms in the States. He would work for like some months and then go back to Jamaica. And then he would do that again until he was able to actually stay here permanently. And then eventually he sent for my mom. So it was a very small population of Black folk that was coming from different countries, and they were only able to come in, with some assistance from business and government that worked together to bring those workers here. First off, okay, and then also too, like, what a lot of other people don't really understand, like when you hear like, oh, y'all just so lazy. There's federations in the United States government right now that is actively advocating for people who come from those countries to come here. I mean, like one of the highest visas recipients, I believe, are for Indians, East Indians, to come here to work a lot of these tech jobs. And the thing about it is that, and I even learned this even personally. I learned that I can learn anything if I have the right teacher.
Mm-hmm.
If I had the right teacher, I can learn anything. I used to think that I was horrible at math, and I still am, but I'm not as bad because, I ended up getting like, teachers that actually, worked with me in order for me to be able to learn my formulation properly. But the thing about it is that we consistently fought to get proper resources and equities in our particular communities, just so that we are able to have access to all the different things that everyone else gets access to.
Absolutely.
So I think that like one of our streams that we were discussing previously about, if you if you're in a community where if you went to school and you're not really being taught properly, the resources are not there properly, all the things that you really need to do to be able to have opportunity is actually not helping you there. But you got the dude on the street that's telling you watch this corner for $500 a week.
Oh yeah.
So it's going to definitely be a difference of what you're going to choose, because after that time period, it's going to become what's going to be the best thing for me to do to survive.
Absolutely.
And if that particular opportunity is not presented to you in order for you to take advantage of that, that's not what you're going to do. So this whole notion about, laziness and not caring and not wanting to read or things of that nature, I push back on that so much. I mean, even I taught in public schools. I've seen the difference from even when I was my opportunity to be able to go to like a Catholic school versus some of the children that I actually taught in a public school, and the public school was a fairly new one. It was one of those charter schools, and I saw how basically oftentimes these children were just being pushed along so they can continuously get funding, and they did not have the proper skill set in order for them to be able to survive. So what is going to happen to those particular children?
I agree.
And it wasn't for the lack of them being, it wasn't the lack from them saying that they weren't smart. Actually, a lot of them were very smart, very creative, but you know, their environment and the resources and the things that they all really needed in order for them to be able to be a thriving collective was severely absent. And that's what we're consistently seeing as far as like our communities are concerned. That's why we need policy, but that's a whole nother topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we go back to Candace and some of the problematic crap that she said.
Yes, because
Yeah.
I want this for posterity. What we said about Candace. Yeah.
What we said about Candace Owens. Okay,
Mm.
so another thing that the khaki thing. She mentioned him wearing khaki shorts, and joggers don't usually wear khaki shorts. Why are we pointing out khaki shorts?
I have no idea what that had to do with causality in China. I mean, I understand again, as a person who's been around a lot of Republicans, been around Tea Party people, been around the libertarian Republicans. Again, you have to understand who she's talking to.
Right.
She ain't talking to you or I. She does not care what you or I think. She is talking to white, radical, right-wing people who want to have an excuse to not care about this man being killed, and to not only not care about this man being killed, but to sympathize and to try to get sympathy for his killers. So that's what she's catering to. You know, these guys are just, look how excuse she gave for them. They had called the police, and I'm like, really? Really? And he attacked them. She contextualized the whole thing that way. So she brings up the khaki shorts. Look, and my thing is this: if I ever debated or discussed anything with her, I would like, yeah, that's a Mr. Spock, irrelevant. Irrelevant. That is all irrelevant. Let us get to the point of a human being got killed by two other human beings, and they had no authority. All right, I don't want to hear that citizens arrest stuff. You know, you can say all you want to say, but basically, he didn't stop because two white men told him to stop. And again, he black, so he's supposed to, when two white men tell you to stop.
He black in Georgia, G. I mean, come on. I mean, listen.
Well, I mean, we know that happens black in Chicago. So I mean,
yes, it does.
So, but it definitely happens down in Georgia. They still flying Confederate flags as their state flag. So you know, they let you know how they feel about us. You know, when I go to the South to visit, I'm always amazed at the amount of Confederate flags I see. You know, I know that they want to say, "Oh, it's about our culture." No, it's not. That's that is.
Can I enter this disclaimer too? People watching, we will cuss a lot. Continue.
Well, I'll try not to.
I'm not going to make that promise, but
yeah, I got my people that don't cuss. I'm like, okay. So, but I will say that with the Confederate flags, yeah, to me, I wouldn't even feel comfortable letting my children go to school in a state where the state flies Confederate flags on the state capital, or they fly them on the university campuses. Now, don't get me wrong. I went down to Pigeon Forge one year, and I saw a bunch of black people wearing Confederate flag T-shirts, hats. I'm like, okay, that's okay. And then they did explain it. It's about the culture of the South. And I'm like, that is a nice narrative. However, that's not a true narrative. You know, we know the true narrative of the Civil War. I discussed this one time on one of Ethan's shows, and I won't go overly into it, but the Civil War was predicated on one idea, and that was to maintain the institution of slavery in the free territories, and of course, continue it in the South. That's what they wanted to do. That's what they went to war for. And then they created a whole lot of rhetoric to further dehumanize blacks. You know, talking about this is when blacks want to rape your white daughters, and then you're going to have all this stuff starts. Jefferson Davis and the boys start doing all this stuff. And that has been hard coded in American society, that black women are over sexualized creatures and black men are too, you know. So all this has been put in the national psyche. And let me explain something, white people. White people who are watching. I'm not saying you are individual racists. I'm not saying that you hate black people. I'm not saying that you'll burn a cross in someone's yard. I'm not saying you're trying to lynch or shoot anyone. What I'm saying is, both black and white people, there is a social psychology that we have, and there are some things that are taught to us in ways, and they maintain. You know, they're taught culturally to us. We don't even pick it up subconscious. We don't even pick it up. Like I was telling you about Candace Owens, um, pretty much being a proponent of white nationalism and white supremacy, even though she's black. She is
Yeah,
a proponent. She is a literal proponent of white nationalism and white supremacy.
hmm
Every word she says. All
you
right.
know,
And it's utterly amazing.
I was thinking upon that, even like one of the last things that I read from her. Uh and I and even like every time that she comes on to give her talking points about, different situations, issues that come up, where black folk are involved, and she want to, put in her 2 cents. At first, like, I used to think to myself, like, man, this woman is severely ignorant. She's like severely ignorant. You just don't know enough. But I'm more like leaning towards, no, you do know enough. You know more than what you're putting on. It's just that you have decided to align yourself to this particular point of the post in order for you to be considered relevant, in the cog of white supremacy. Well, in the machine of white supremacy, you are one of the cogs that's in white supremacy. And one of the things that I remember, I don't know, I heard it from one podcast, YouTuber, about, any person that puts themselves in the cog of like white supremacy, is that eventually white supremacy will break its tools.
Absolutely.
It will break
Absolutely.
its
Yeah.
tools.
I mean, it's sort of like when, in those movies where someone summons a demon and thinks the
Mhm.
demon's going to do its bidding. And the first thing the demon does when you summon it, you serve this demon, and all the mystical movies. And finally, when you call forth the demon and he comes up, the first person he kills is the one that called him up. That's how
Right,
it goes. You dance with
right,
the devil. You dance with the
right,
devil, you're going to get burnt. It is what it
right.
is.
And
And
it's
white, and I'm not saying white people are devils. I'm saying white supremacy is a
Right,
demonic
right.
mindset.
Let's break this down, because like, I will use like the term white supremacy, and or like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and also Neely Fuller used to like use racism, white supremacy. And I think that that is a better way to put it, because that's what white supremacy is. It's about racism. It's about keeping a group up here and keeping another one down here.
Absolutely.
So it's really just basically a play on what the American and societal caste system is. Okay,
Absolutely.
so so like that's the one we're not necessarily talking about white. And I mentioned even this on a previous a stream of ours, is that white supremacy is not about melanin or lack of melanin. It's not about, oh, you look this way and I look this way. It's about normalcy. That is what whiteness is, or white supremacy is. It's about normalcy. And when we mean normalcy, that means that you're going to have equity and protections in order to keep your position the way that it is, while people who don't have access to it are going to stay at the bottom where we are. You know,
Absolutely.
and
And
yeah, go
I
ahead.
wanted to speak on that normalcy thing. I'm just going to give you an example. I don't know if I gave it to you before or someone else I was speaking to.
Mm-hmm,
When you're right, it is normalcy.
mm-hmm,
And let me give you a dichotomy with that. Take for example Serena Williams, right? Beautiful African American woman, all right. She has proud African features, all right,
mm-hmm.
all right, and she would wear blonde wigs and blue contacts.
Don't understand, but okay.
Right, right. But
Yeah.
now she's wearing a straight blonde wig,
Mm-hmm,
blue contacts. No one bats an eye. No one says that that's not normal. So
mm-hmm,
I challenge someone to say, I said, okay, what if Anna Korkanova, when her no tennis playing butt, who couldn't win a game, but she was a celebrity nonetheless. None
mm-hmm.
against her. All right. She's a blonde, blue-eyed white woman. If she put on brown contacts and afro wig, right, and tried to walk around like it was normal, people would be like, "Oh my God, what'd you do? Why are you
Mm-hmm.
doing that?" I'm not talking about for the sake. Even if I'm not talking about it from the perspective of her trying to mock somebody. She just really wanted to do it. I want to do this today. I think this looks good. I like this type of hair.
Mm-hmm.
I like these color eyes. People would think that she was ridiculous. They would think she was a clown. And
Mm-hmm.
why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put on that nappy hair? all right, and hide your pretty blue eyes behind some brown contacts,
Hmm.
people would, that's the thing of normalcy, you know. I remember I explained this to a white person one time. They didn't even realize that black women perm their hair. They thought it was like that. That's how conditioned they are to believe. When they saw black women with straight hair, they, oh, I thought that was just like that. I'm like, you didn't know that they perm their hair or that. And I'm not, and don't get me wrong, sisters, don't email me. I'm not saying you can't perm your hair. Wear your hair whatever way you want to. It's
Uh,
like Eddie
that's
Murphy
a
said in,
whole nother
yeah,
topic, my
like
brother.
like 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 Eddie Murphy said in Come to America. It's America. It's a free country. If you want to wear your hair like that, wear your hair like that. I'm just pointing out. I'm just pointing out a perceptional
Right.
concept that people have. So you're right with the normalcy. That is
Hmm.
very important. But one other thing I want to touch on, what she was clowning LeBron James on. Let me explain. Remember, I think I had started down this track and saying we need to be mindful that we're no longer speaking just to each other. All right,
Hmm.
we are speaking to the world. So we have
Hmm.
to be deliberate in our language.
Hmm.
We cannot use emotional language because emotional language, one, if people aren't seeing you as human, it's bouncing off them anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. If
That's
we're trying to get them to understand, we cannot use that degree of hyperbole. I remember
mhm.
the one actor from I think Grey's Anatomy, Jesse something, Jesse Williams. I don't know what his name was. He's a light skinned guy.
Yeah,
Um,
I believe it was Jesse Williams.
I remember that he was on the BET Awards and or BET Honor, something like that. And
Hmm.
he was upset about all the killing and stuff, rightfully so, very emotional. Speaking to a
Hmm.
group of black people in that audience, but
Hmm.
not realize you are speaking to the world. So
Hmm.
he said, and I think it had to be 19 or 2012 or 2014. I don't remember the year, but he
Hmm.
said 2014 or 2016 is no different than 1814 or 1816. Now,
Hmm.
to you and I, we understand what he is saying. To the
Right.
world, that is a ridiculous statement. It is
Hmm.
an utterly ridiculous statement because there's a very big difference between 1816 and 2016. Yeah, there's some things we got to get through. But the
Hmm.
reality is, if somebody came with a time machine to one of us right now and said, okay, where do you want to go? 2016, 1816, your choice. We're going with 2016 because
But
we're
you
not going back to 1816 because we know what it is. And
but
I
yeah.
say this when you're talking to the world,
Hmm.
you have to understand that hyperbole and rhetorical tools that are utilized to invoke emotions, you have to just realize your audience. You got to speak to your audience. So when Candace Owens is speaking to her white nationalist audience, all right, and trying to give them more and more excuses to ignore LeBron James anger,
Yeah, she
she
gives
is
them.
ridiculing, language that you and I clearly understand what he meant.
Hmm.
And she, like you said, I agree with you. She clearly understood what he meant. She likes
Yeah.
to play. I call willfully ignorant. She wants to play
Yeah.
ignorant, but
Yeah.
she knew
Yeah.
what he
She
meant.
knows. Yeah, she
But
knows.
she's talking to that white nationalist group, and not
Hmm.
just the white nationalists. She's talking to the white people on the fence. That's the part that's
Hmm.
dangerous.
Right.
She's talking to the ones on the fence that are feeling kind of, well, we're not all bad, and they're
Mhm.
already feeling attacked, and she's giving them ammunition to ignore the inhumanity of what happened, and that's
Right.
what it comes down to.
Wait, because I know that we ain't gonna have too much time, but I did want to get to like definitely one of the tweets that she put up. Um, so our lovely producer, if you can hear me, can we go to the one where she starts at Black America needs to get real and stop believing? There you go. Thank you. I think that she put this up yesterday. She said, Black America needs to get real and stop believing there is always a race narrative that underlines everything. Neighbors recognized him. They called the cops, and then two people fatally attempted to take the law into their own hands. And, you can take that down. Thanks, Ethan. Um, and again, this goes back to the whole narrative or the notion about race and how we as Black people do not have the luxury to not look at race because race defines everything in our lives. Race is going to determine oftentimes where you live, where you go to school, even in some cases, how much money you're going to make, if you're going to have access to wealth or not, if you're going to be able to have a larger income or not, or even be able to keep the income or not. That is definitely what race has done in America. And remember, race is definitely something that was actually created for economic purposes. I believe, shout out to Arthur who put that up. The creation of race was for economic purposes, and you're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
The whole issue was basically to let's create race in order to keep, other people who happen to be in the same position away from each other. So again, we can keep a 1%, we can keep an elite class, and then we can keep people on the bottom. So again, we don't have the luxury to be able to actually divorce ourselves from race. Another thing too is this whole thing about, the underlines the whole thing about neighbors recognizing him. So I'm not sure if you heard this, Richard, but I wish I had the article. I think it was in the Daily Mail. I want to say it was in the Daily Mail about that apparently he Ahmad was I guess stopped by them a couple weeks previously, if I want to say.
Wow.
So he was in that area, and then so like when he was, I guess when he showed up again, that's when they had like the surveillance cameras and things of that nature. I should have saved the article. I do apologize that I didn't. But even with that particular notion, it still did not give justification to what happened to this young man.
Absolutely.
This whole thing about taking, becoming like a vigilante. I mean, like basically these two men just took on like, Green Hornet and Cato style type stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
They decided that they was gonna go ahead and pursue, because that's exactly what they did. They got into their pickup truck with their shotguns, and they pursued this man on foot. Okay, well, he was on foot, and they pursued him. And even, the whole thing about him saying that he attacked him, it's bullshit, man.
Yeah.
Look, let me tell you something. I don't have a gun. I'm thinking about getting one, but I don't have one. But I tell you something now. If somebody is coming after me with a gun and I'm seeing that thing in my face, I'm going to do one of three things. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fly. I'm going to hit flight. I'm going to run. I'm going to freeze.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the automatic response of any human being when they're in danger. Anytime that you think a person is going to come up to you, you don't know who they are, or even if you partially recognize them and they're coming at you, look with their nose flared and a shotgun in hand, and you unarmed, you gonna do whatever you can in order for you to survive. And that's exactly what that dude did. Regardless of his record in the past, I seriously doubt that them dudes knew if he had a criminal record in the past. The only thing that they saw was a black man running away, and they supposedly domicile, and they decided to take the law into their own hands.
Right.
And
And,
that's the bottom line.
and I just want to add, you're right. Race was created, like I always say, for the purposes of forwarding the transatlantic slave trade, which was about economics and money. Period.
Right.
All right.
Period.
But as far as what you said about them being after him, he was a black man, and it's just that simple. And for her, for Candace Owens to try to divorce race from the situation, again, she's trying to speak to a group of people, make them feel better about this bullshit online, as
Right.
opposed to, again, like I said, I can't really respect anything she says. I don't even consider her a conservative. I just consider her a demagogue that speaks to the radical right and white nationalism. She's as much a part of white nationalism as the alt-right. That she's part of that, and it is what it is. We always have those type of people. We
Right.
always have them, and like I said, I'm not going to call her any names because I don't believe in calling blacks I disagree with, those names that we like to throw at each other,
Yeah.
because I think that kind of undermines our conversation. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, yeah, she's hopefully one day she comes face to face with herself and gets it right.
Well, we have a proverbial come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it
Uh,
looks like I think we're at the end of our time. I'm looking. I think
yeah.
we're an hour. So let me
Mhm.
thank everyone for tuning in. We'll
Yeah.
be on every other Wednesday. Me and Cynthia, and we'll be talking about different topics as they come up. I'm sure we'll get better as we go along. I apologize for any bumps in the road. And again, like I said, hey, if I'm going to tell you something from a historical perspective, I'm not going to, it's not Mark Twain where we're going to delete every time the N word was used, because that's not real life. I'm going to tell you what life was like in 1863. Then I'm going to say how what was said when they were lynching people. And like I said, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then you're part of the problem, because that's the reality of the situation. You have to know the dead set reality of what happened and how that affects and informs what's happening now. And that's the whole point of history. We have to know where we came from to understand where we're actually at, to see how far we got to go. History is just a map. All right. So we've come a long way. Like I said, 1865 or 1816 and in 2016, very different times. But the things in 1816 that happened to help formulate this whole white nationalist systemic and institutional racism in America that undermines that culture and that social psychology that we maintain, that is real. That's an effect. That's a cause, and that's an effect. And that effect has real quantifiable outcomes that are uneven, that we need to discuss. And we have to first accept the fact that there's a problem, and again, like I said, with Candace Owens, like I said, she's speaking to who she wants to speak to.
And she a problem.
Yeah, she's a problem because she gives them an excuse. She gives them cover for their racism.
Right.
She gives them cover for their hatred. And like I said, I don't have much respect for her. Sheriff Clark up in Milwaukee, he does the same thing. Ben Carson does the same thing. He has tried to be more slick about it. Alan West does the same thing. I've seen
what's that other guy? I think it's Jesse Lee Peterson.
I've heard of him. I haven't seen him speak. And then you get the old school ones like Thomas Sowell. He's a professor of economics, very bright guy, but he says some of the most ignorant things for someone with a PhD. It just goes to show you can have a PhD and still not have common sense or basic reasoning ability. But then again, I think it's like you said earlier. It's not that they don't know; they don't care, because now they got a market. They got a market. They got who they're making their money from. They got who's putting them on. So they're going to say whatever they have to say about that.
Yeah, at this particular point in time, it's about who's going to give me that check. And that's definitely going to color what comes out of your mouth.
And she's getting a check.
She getting a few checks. So But again, everyone, thank you again for tuning in to the 13%. As Richard said, that we will be on every other Wednesday at 6:30-ish p.m. Daylight time, Central Time, whatever you want to call it. And make sure you all like this video, subscribe to WFNA, and also hit the bell so that you can get notifications every time that this channel, especially the 13%, goes live. And eventually we would definitely like to have like a roundtable conversation with people who come into the chat and all that other great stuff. So
and let me extend Miss Owens' open invitation. If you'd like to discuss this with us, I'd be happy to discuss this. I think don't mean to speak for you, Cynthia, but I think we'd be able to have an intelligent conversation with her as long as she wants to maintain one. So you're welcome. As the famous Val Kilmer said in Tombstone, we're your Huckleberry. Come talk with us.
I was gonna use an old trope from the South Side. If you're feeling froggy, then leap.
Exactly.